bring your cloud into compliance and prove it, because, well, compliance is something that few of us can really avoid in our work, and it just doesn't need to be as hard and as time-consuming and frustrating as it often is. A little bit of housekeeping first. Wanted to let you all know about the next in our Cloud Security Masterclass series, locking down the security of AWS IAM. This is going to be a part 2 in that series. We did the first part of AWS IAM security a little while ago. You can check that out on demand, as well as part 1 and 2 on the security of Amazon S3. And we will continue to do these. The chat is open to all throughout this session. Please use that for any questions that you might have at any point during this. We want this to be an interactive session for everybody. So questions, comments, get them in early and often throughout this session. Today, we're really thrilled to have back with us is Dave Williams, a cloud architect at New Light Technologies. Dave, hello. Want to check your audio, Dave?
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Coming with me. Hi, Drew. How are you? I'm glad to be here.
Doing great. Thanks for joining us. And also we have from Fugue, CTO and co-founder, Josh Stella. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Drew. Hey, Dave. Hey, Sivia. Hi to everyone who's joined us.
Awesome. Awesome. Hey, Josh, why don't you kind of set us up here, and maybe we'll move on to the agenda slide.
Yeah, great. So today is kind of a special masterclass. We have a guest instructor, and I'm really excited about it. As those of you who have attended before know, Drew and I are the co-founders of Fugue. I'm the CTO, so we're a software vendor. And we focus very much on compliance and policy and security. But Dave is an expert practitioner in taking real production cloud accounts for their customers at New Light into compliance. And a little bit about, why we're talking about compliance. I mean, compliance sometimes is a eyes glazed kind of topic, but it shouldn't be, because everyone who's operating on cloud needs to be very concerned about their security posture and getting it right. And as at every other part in this masterclass series, we've been trying to share ways to think about that and bring things into a better security posture. And the best starting place to do that is to use one of the compliance standards like CIS or HIPAA to examine your infrastructure, understand where you stand and what you need to do to get into better compliance. Now, a theme of these master classes, our goal is to provide you a mental model, to provide you a structure to take big complex problems and knock them down into things you can actually address. And the reason for that is you need to be able to reason about this. There is no cookie cutter approach for every problem space in solving these things on cloud. You need to have a methodology. And Dave has done just an awesome job of breaking this very complex and difficult topic down into a methodology you can use in your cloud environments, whatever your requirements are, to really solve this. So it's going to be very cool. As those of you who are repeats know, we like to have a little bit of fun. Dave, if you can turn off your screen sharing for a sec. One of the things we do to have some fun at these master classes is put up some backgrounds on Zoom. And these are going to be backgrounds from kind of geek culture. That's what we call them. It's mostly just stuff I like related to computers and video games and movies. Today we're going to have a little bit more focus on the history of computing in these backgrounds. And the way this works is when I put the background up, the first person to put in the public chat, you got to make sure you're talking to all panelists and attendees in the chat, what my background is, will win some swag. We know we all used to love going to events, and thanks to COVID, we're not going to events. So you get a chance to win some swag, I think a cool t-shirt and some other cool stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my first background here. Oh, once you've won in this session, you can't win again. Okay. So if you win swag by guessing a background, please refrain from guessing additional backgrounds because that will spoil it for the rest of us. All right, let's start with something. Let's start with an easy one. I think this is an easy one. Maybe we'll see if it's an easy one. Okay. What is that computer? I removed the logos. No, it's not an Atari, but it's from the same era as Atari. Old school Apple? Nope, not Tandy, not Compaq. Mike got it. Mike, well, we got a bunch coming through now. Mike Henders got it. This is the original Amiga 1000 by Commodore, one of the coolest computers, in my opinion, personal computers ever, and one of the funkiest too. The motherboard actually in the next version it was the Rock Lobster version of the motherboard. Just a really cool, neat engineering team. All right, we got that going. I'm going to turn it over to Dave now to walk us through, and we'll take a couple more breaks. We'll have more chances to win. We'll probably end up doing 4 of these. But it's 8 after, so I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Dave, teach us some things.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Josh. That looked a lot like the first real computer that I grew up with back in like '86 was a TRS-80. I don't know if you remember those from Tandy.
Oh yeah.
But my dad got into it, and I remember like Bank Street Rider and storing, like you had to have an entire 5 1/4 drive to store like a single dock. I don't know. Times have changed.
Oh yeah.
So the setup for the discussion today, kind of setting the table or kind of the arc of what we're going to talk about, is you may have an organization, you work for a company or organization that has to either be compliant to a security family like SOC or HIPAA or GDPR or NIST. The actual techies like us, like me, are in the trenches remediating these environments to get them compliant. It's more than just technical work, in my opinion. In fact, the hardest part is not encrypting disks like in AWS. It's not configuring switches and things like that and parameters. It's trying to interpret very opaque and generalized language coming out of security family controls. And I'll show examples of that. And understanding how that applies to your environment and making sure that you're interpreting it correctly. And and I'll make a case that I don't want to do that, and I don't think engineers should be doing that. I think we need to rely upon the services and resources in the industry that do that interpretation, and let us do what we're good at, which is the actual technical work. And then talking through how do we actually get this done, some strategies on doing real remediation for running environments, some lessons learned. I can give you some anecdotes on things I've done wrong. And like I was relaying to the team yesterday or the day before, you push a button and then all of a sudden, like you feel the blood drain from your body because you just realize you made this big mistake. So hopefully a few of those things that I've learned the hard way we can relay. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to use HIPAA as an example here. It could be any family, but the HIPAA controls that affect public cloud. And I'm going to focus on AWS. The themes are the same for really any public cloud, Azure or Google or Alibaba or whatever your environment is. I think this is kind of the proverbial, like, how do you eat the elephant? I think we have to break it down into actionable steps. And this is basically what I do with our customers. And the first step, and we're going to keep going back to these, I think the first step is you have to know what your current state is. So you have to know where you are and how compliant you are. And we're gonna keep showing this as sort of a transition slide. And there's if anyone recalls the dimming, plan, do, act circle, if maybe that's dating me. So there's sort of 4 steps here, and then we're going to talk about at the end. It's kind of, to me, a paradigm shift or kind of a sea change in how we do this, and that's prevention. But we're going to start on determining state. Well, I think you have really two fundamental choices when determining your current state or status. Do you try and do this on your own? And if you do attempt to do this on your own, option one, as I have on the screen, you've got to understand, as I was saying, what's in the security model and how that applies to your technology environment. And I can promise you, and I'll show you, and if anyone's done this kind of work, you know the interpretation of the canonical text for these security families is very difficult. You then have to convert what their requirements are in their language and their vernacular into what that means for your particular cloud provider, right? They don't say, go into Azure, open a storage account and require connection, click this checkbox. It's not worded like that. They'll be very vague encryption at rest in that example requirements. Well, and then you have to actually, either go in through the console, meaning the website, or write scripts to then query and audit the environment to get the current state. And I want to show why I think this is not the best approach. This is just two examples, and I've got a PCI screen cap here, and I've got HITRUST as an example here, and these are two of maybe a dozen popular industry models. I'm looking for examples of encryption in transit, right? Which basically boils down to using HTTPS, SFTP, things like that, and not running unencrypted comms. These are examples of some of the text you'll see, and I just want to highlight that, it's very wordy. It has to apply to all sorts of systems. So I think that we as engineers and techies should not we should not attempt to interpret this kind of language, because when we do, we're then owning the risk if we're wrong. So it's one thing to actually implement the technical controls, and that's what I think I'm good at, right? But what I'm not good at, and what I don't want to be good at, is attempting to interpret the PCI standard and how it applies to AWS. So there are tools that do this, and I'm going to show them today, right? And so I'm going to attempt to Alt-Tab over here. So here, this happens to be Fugue, and we use Fugue all the time with customers. But this is an environment. This is a sandbox AWS environment, and I have three families turned on: HIPAA, PCI, and SOC. And we're interested in HIPAA for this discussion today. You can see this is very out of compliant. This is a rough environment. We purposely leave things misconfigured kind of for some activities. Some of those we should clean up. Anyway, I can rely on a industry tool and their business and security analysts who do nothing but, for example, in the PCI model, work with PCI to ensure that it's very clear to me what I need to do. So my first recommendation is you have to determine state, and I would advise there are a handful of tools in the industry. Fugue is one of them. Fugue is fantastic. There are others, but I recommend don't do it yourself. You can't do it. I promise you can't do it as cheap as you can buy a tool or use a tool. But more importantly, I think the risk is way too high. The risk for yourself, your career, also the risk to your organization. All right. I'm going to pause for a sec to see if anyone jumps in. We're gonna then move into the identify gaps, and I think I'm actually going to stop sharing here, right, Josh?
Yeah, let's go ahead and stop sharing so that I can do another background, and throw in the chat if there are any particular compliance standards you're interested in. Dave, as you were presenting that, you were presenting HIPAA, and a lot of folks don't think too much about things like HIPAA. Because they may not be in healthcare. But one thing that I've learned is even if you're not going to get audited against a compliance standard, it's really good to check against them because they're designed to improve your safety and security. All right, we're going to do a video game, and in the theme of a mid-'80s personal computer, this is a program you might have run on this computer. It's not Mario. Oh, yeah. Let's see. Oh, man. Yeah. A bunch of you are kindred spirits. There was a flood of Oregon Trail is the correct answer. I think Alec Suleiman got it first. Congratulations to Alec. I picked these and I think they're going to be hard, but they're just often not. Yeah, Oregon Trail, the game where you mostly, it's like slow motion. It's like slow motion Doom. You just die a lot, but it takes a while.
Maybe this is, I wanted to jump in. I wanted to see, this might be a good spot to do a quick poll. We are kind of exploring the idea of doing kind of like a half-day virtual event that's really targeted at like cloud engineers, cloud architects, with a focus on cloud infrastructure security and compliance, shift left, policy as code, misconfiguration risk, all of those kinds of things. And just wanted to get a sense from folks out there as to whether you would be interested in attending a free event like this, fully virtual half-day event. So would appreciate your thoughts on whether that is of any interest to you. So thank you. And this felt like a good time to pop that in.
All right. Do you want me to go back to Sharon?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, let's turn it back over to you, Dave, to get on to section 2. And as you go ahead and share your screen, you know, this is the mental model I was talking about. What Dave has broken it down to. He says, step 1, that determined state. This slide alone, if you take anything from this, and we are going to share all this afterwards in a recording and on SlideShare, but this cycle here of determine state, identify gaps, remediate, prove and monitor, and then prevent, it's a great way to address this. So Dave, I'm just going to turn it back over to you. Thank you.
And Dave, we actually have a really good question. I think it's an evergreen one that's going to be relevant to a lot of people. Stuart asks, you know, what might be a good compliance standard for people who don't have to adhere to any specific standard?
Yeah, that actually is a really good question. I would say, in my experience, they are more common than they're different. So one of the things we'll talk about, actually, I think in this next section, is we're going to recommend maybe a dozen things you can do, and we're going to give some scripts. And we're also building out a repo that has remediation for AWS, Azure, Google, where if you do this, you're going to hit like 75% of most of the families. I don't know actually if I have a good answer. I think, yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Dave, some of our attendees are I think putting some really good suggestions in the chat. Let's see who Vahid and Hiranya. I hope I got that pronunciation right. And now Kevin. You know, NIST is kind of like a meta standard. A lot that you're going to find in the other stuff is in NIST. So the recommendation was NIST if you're in the US and ISO 27K if you're international. There's a lot of overlap between the two. The Venn diagram is maybe like 85%. Those are really good places to start if you're not regulated. A lot of people do CIS Benchmark, which is a good one too. NIST is going to be more thorough, and ISO as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's a best answer, but I think if I had to pick one to say, do this one, it'll give you the best bang for the buck, and is an interpretable, I'd probably go with SOC 2, type 2 would work.
Okay, you're coming in with a different, you know, I feel you though, because, you know, SOC 2, if you're not familiar with SOC 2, so like Fugue is doing SOC 2 right now. And SOC 2 is what you do if you're a software vendor, and it's pretty thorough too. You know, what I tend to recommend to, you know, if you want to use the free version of Fugue, and this is not a product pitch, it's just, this is what we do, so that's how I can relate to it most easily. I just turn them all on and see what I get, you know, and decide if things are important.
And I just want to say, so I'm answering from the perspective of using tools that have interpreted these families and help me figure out what I need to do for the cloud environment. I'm not answering from what I consider to be a much harder perspective of going through like a full audit. So I think one thing I want to state is, like, if you go through a SOC audit or PCI audit or high trust audit, The actual cloud work you're going to do is, I don't know, maybe 10, 20, 30% of the overall work. The much harder work is all the other stuff. It's the organizational compliance and HR and all these other things, endpoint security. So I gave my answer from knowing what Fugue and some other systems tell me what I need to do to my AWS environments in Azure. SOC 2, from a practical implementation in the cloud, seems to have the broadest, most useful stuff. But there's so much similarity at the end of the day between like HIPAA, SOC, PCI. You can just turn them on and find the ones that they all hit. And actually, that's what we're getting right into. All right, I'm gonna keep going. And there's some great questions here. I would love to answer more, but I will let Drew and Josh kind of curate these so I don't end up talking, just re-answer questions. So I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, we got too much to cover. Let's
All right. So the next thing is identify gaps, and I'm going to go back to one of these screens. Is once you in Fugue, as for example, I can look at resource types, and I can filter by a compliance family, and I can find out where I'm out of compliance. And this is a very very clear one. Is based upon these HIPAA sections, right? And again, this is, to me, the hardest part, is someone or someones are actively interpreting the HIPAA spec, and they say, if you have CloudWatch log groups, they must be encrypted, in this case with KMS keys, okay? Customer managed keys, right? So this is the actual rubber meeting the road of what you have to do to then get into compliance. And I'm gonna keep going and talk through. Now, the next 3 slides, I think it's either 3 or 4 slides, they have about a dozen gaps that you will likely need to work on no matter what family you're working on. And I say this from having worked on at least maybe 6 of them: high trust, HIPAA, PCI, SOC, NIST. These are the common ones. And in some cases here, we've got the scripts. We've got these as CLI statements here. You're welcome to use. We also have them as like CDK and some other languages. We're actively going to build out a repo and start posting this stuff. So, to just kind of give back, and also to hopefully get some contribution to S3, AWS S3, right? If you're doing AWS, you have S3. Well, you've got to force encryption on the bucket. You need to require CPS, and you need a lifecycle policy on the data stored there within. I love intelligent tiering. In almost all cases, it's the cheapest option. All right, there's 3 examples for S3 that you're going to see everywhere. The next one is security groups and ports. Of course, everyone knows this. It's probably the most common, and the most common sense one is you're going to find tons of ports open you shouldn't use. Here are some rules. Here's how to revoke ports, as just an example of a CLI statement in AWS. Here's some, and a lot of this is kind of common sense stuff, but it's so much of the work that we do because it just pops up everywhere. You have developers or engineers trying to get stuff to work. They open, well, I just got to SSH in. Let me open 22 to the internet. They forget to close it. Don't use 80. Use HTTP, SWIT 443. Everyone knows this, but it's out there more than you think. Basically, if you have any open ports from the broad internet other than 443, you're going to get flagged. An interesting one that I actually don't know the real point to. I think I do, but I don't know the exact reason is, if you're using the default security group that comes, so each VPC, the private cloud LAN that is created in AWS, if you use the default security group, you can't use it. It can't have any inbound or outbound ports. So it's a strange rule to me, but it pops up everywhere. So what we end up doing is we just remove it, use another security group, and just revoke the ports inbound and outbound of the default one. This comes up everywhere. You're going to spend time in this one, I promise. And it's it's like whacking moles as much as possible. We're going to talk about prevention in the future. And then here are some more examples. I didn't want to post all the scripts here just for sake of brevity. But again, if you hit the ones I just said and these, it's at least 50% of what we see across most customers, most security families. Your accounts need a password policy. They basically have to be as complex as you can make them: alphanumerics, uppers and lowers, strange characters, etc. 90-day rotation. This is a biggie. 90-day key and password rotation. Don't use ** on accounts, on user accounts, on users. Don't directly attach IAM policies. I'm going to bounce around. CloudFront distributions, if you're doing that, have to use HTTPS, a WAF. EBS disks need to be encrypted, VPCs, flow logs, things like that. So this is what I spend most of my time with customers on across different environments and across different families. All right. Now we're into the next phase, and I'm going to kind of pause for a second, see if we have any questions or comments.
Well, I've been, you know, it's really nice. Normally in these master classes, I'm teaching them, and it's really nice to be able to spend a lot of time in the chat with folks. And so I think I've been, there's been a lot of commentary and discussion around different compliance standards as we've gone on, but I don't see any particular questions outside of, there were one or two product questions around Fugue. By the way, we're not trying to do a product demo here. Dave's talking about the problem space. He's using Fugue as an example, but there are other examples too. All right. So we do have somebody, Robert Brown says, just curious, NIST has said since 2017 that password complexity is no longer recommended, just require long passwords. But I still see password complexity requirements in tools. What am I missing? That humans aren't rational. It's the short answer, because complexity means nothing to a computer. It's the same number of bits, the same amount of entropy. So long matters, complexity doesn't, unless it's humans guessing, and that only happens in movies.
It would take application developers more work to update their application's password requirements, and that's probably not high on their priority list, so they don't bother.
I think also there's, you know, there's just a lag, and because that statement, right, and I'm aware of that, and actually, like, I only have a few passwords I use and try and use password managers, but they're phrases like, you know, I'm attending a master class today, and,
yes.
and if you determine, right, I need something I can remember, length gets into how hard it is to crack, right? And I can't remember something with a bunch of characters. But my point is that what I'm trying to say, and I'm kind of being long-winded, is the sentiment that complexity is now no longer in vogue, right? That's pretty new. I think it's only a couple years old. So I think we're still seeing that lag in what the actual specs require relative to the most modern sort of best practices that are out there. I assume that that'll change one day.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, which is, you know, these compliance standards, there is a gap in time between what security practitioners understand as best practices and when it makes it into the standard. We try to do some work around that at Fugue, but it's a good idea to not just use a compliance standard, but also keep up on kind of the state of the art. Let's see here. Let's do a background. We had an attendee say she liked the game background, so I'm going to do a game background. All right, here we go.
That one's too easy, Josh.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You know, I played a lot of really like edge case game, like very niche games. I'm going to have to start pulling those out because every time I look at them, I'm thinking nobody's going to get that, but okay. Sivia, if you can find who the first person who said Mortal Kombat was, that's what it is. Let's see.
It was, yes, definitely. I'll find it for you.
So we do have a question. Sandra likes the old school. Okay, I'm going to do more old school for the next masterclass. You'll get new backgrounds. I'm going to go deeper into the esoterica of video gaming.
And the winner is Haranya Maru.
All right. We'll get some swag. All right. Galed says, I see compliance issues identified in a reasons column on the slide. Can these reasons output be customized to automatically generate references to specify in-house or authority control, e.g. FedRAMP moderate? Thanks. I'll take a brief crack at this and then turn it over to Dave. As I understand the question, it's can something that is out of compliance be mapped back to the actual control from the compliance family? Yes, That's part of why Dave was saying you might not want to do this at home because it's a pain, right? Because if you think about like, you should have encryption in flight everywhere. Well, what's everywhere in AWS? There are a lot of places across a lot of services. And so like we at Fugue, when we see, you know, you've got a load balancer that's open on a unencrypted port to the internet, or if you've got a DynamoDB database that's not necessarily forced to speak encrypted, those are both related to that single control, but it's across a lot of services. So that's my short answer. Dave, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, other than just even thinking about that, like as you're talking, like if I attempted to do this myself, I would have to identify all of the services that have any sort of network connection, and then have to query them whether I use them or not. I mean, it's exhausting, right? So
it's non-trivial.
Not non-trivial.
And by the way, you know, like I said, this is not a product pitch, but you know, I'm the CTO of Fugue, so that's what I'm familiar with. We have an open source project called Regula that you can use for checking Terraform plans for a lot of this. So, and we have a free version too. And there are other tools out there. Some are native to AWS and Azure, and I know Dave uses some of those too. So, you know, but you want to tap into either a community or a company that has spent a lot of time on interpreting. Dave, why don't I turn it back over to you, and we'll keep rolling.
Cool. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yep, looks good.
Okay. All right. So the next step is actual remediating. And I've got basically one sort of summary slide here. And the first thing is there's no panacea. There's no magic bullet. But here are some things that I recommend. I think the first and most important thing is before you start making changes to your environment, you have to have a way to test whether your changes have broken something. For most customers, and I think for most people, you have infrastructure because you're supporting some sort of application. It's not just like, you know, S3 storage. So you need to be able to test your app. You need, and ideally this would be automated, if not manual, but I don't think you can begin this process in earnest. I think this is a requirement. Otherwise, you're basically making changes blind, and you have no idea what you're going to break. And if you actually have a real production environment and real customers, you know, you're going to get notified if something's not working by customers, which is the worst case scenario. So you've got to have a way to test. A lot of people I work with, this is manual, right? So there's a sort of exhaustive smoke testing of the major movements, major processes within an application environment. So it doesn't have to be automated, but there has to be a testing process in place so that as you make something, as you make a change, as you revoke ports, as you make configuration changes, someone can go in and confirm that the application and environment is working the way it needs to be working. Well, I feel a little bit silly saying some of these things because they're kind of common sense, but I've not followed some of these or been in environments where they aren't as common as maybe you would think. You need to do this work first off in a non-production environment. And it's important because it helps you identify changes that are going to break things, right? But it also helps you sort of refine and mature your remediation process. So as much as possible, a staging environment, and I use that term to mean a clone of production, is really ideal so that we can test against environments that are, in some cases, are exact duplicates of production, so that we know once we pass our staging test, the changes to the production environment are likely to be low impact. But you need to do it first in a non-production environment to learn, to refine your process, and to catch things that are going to potentially be destructive and take down your application before you actually make the change in production and learn the hard way there. Where possible, and this is true in this case, and really anything we do, I think, in the cloud, is use scripts as opposed to clicking buttons in the console. The reason being that once you've written them, actually, I'm gonna make this comment. When you do some work, remediation, you're gonna do it again. Like, unless you have the cleanest environment in the history of the cloud, you're gonna have to do this sort of cleanup and hygiene process more than once, I promise. So unless you wanna keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, script it out. plus, when you script it, it means it's repeatable, right? Exactly as it is. So then when you test it out in your non-production environments, right, your dev or staging, and it works, you're very confident that it's going to take place in production. And then of course, when it's scripted, you can source control it, you can share it, you can peer review it, and you're not relying upon a human to go through and click 32 different buttons or hundreds of buttons as they move across different environments. So script it where possible. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is common, either using like AWS CLI. If you're doing infrastructure as code, right, you can do it in your IAC, Terraform, CloudFormation, CDK, things like that. Okay, here's another one that it's so, sorry. Let me, I clicked the screen. It's so important. I really should be like blinking red text is you must have a rollback strategy for everything you change, right? And because unless you absolutely know something, and I've been in situations where and I'm gonna give you an anecdote here, where I absolutely knew something, and then as soon as I click go, I absolutely realized I didn't know everything and I broke something. A rollback means that if you revoke a port, if you change a bucket policy, and you break production access or break access, that you can get it back to the prior state to then get things back working, to then figure out what you actually need to do to remediate. And this can be screen caps. It can be running queries and recording the state. And that's what we generally do is we run queries on things through like the AWS CLI, Azure CLI, to capture the current state of environments. But this is so important. Please, before you start making changes, especially to production, record the current configuration, because you will come across something that broke something and you need to go back. And if you can't, then you're in trouble. And I'll give you an example. I was doing some work with a customer that had about 100, right at I think 100, 99 or 100 is like the soft limit on S3 buckets. And this is in a production environment. And we were updating their bucket policy to force HTTPS usage and to update the lifecycle policy. And the script that we wrote overwrote the existing bucket policies. And I say this kind of like I'm embarrassed to say it. And we did capture the bucket policies before, so we were able to roll back. But as soon as I hit enter, it occurred to me that we just nuked the bucket policies on 100 buckets in a production account. And the bucket policy, for those that don't know, basically defines everything that the bucket, how it can be accessed, what can be done to it. It's a super important security and configuration piece. So we basically took down their entire S3 tier. And if we were not able to roll back, I mean, it's one of those moments where I start questioning whether I'm in the right line of work, but you learn from them, and then I won't do it again. Yes.
I mean, we've all done it, Dave. You're not alone in that. We've all done it. There's a related question in the chat, and I just want to, Dave, you're doing a great job presenting. We're at about 20 minutes out, just FYI. We got a question from one attendee. Are you using a DevOps approach? And I think that applies directly to what you're talking about, the ability to roll back, that this is not kind of after the fact necessarily. You need a DevOps approach to be able to do things like roll code back to another version.
Yeah, I would like to. I'd like to understand what is meant by the DevOps approach in this context, but the customer, I will say this, the customers that I work with, some are extremely immature and some are very mature. And sort of the level of skill and advance is on the continuum from nothing is scripted to they're doing the most advanced things. So I think anywhere possible, we lean towards scripts and automation, and it definitely factors in this. So I'll try and keep, I'll speed things up a little bit, Josh, to be mindful of time. All right, and then for the production work, there's nothing too major here other than grouping work in related batches, because if you're doing port work, do it at the same time with other port work. It's easier just to kind of be in that same mind space to have your scripts ready. So this is the remediation phase. I'm going to move to the next one. All right, prove and monitor. I'm going to go fast for the sake of time. All right. So once you're compliant,
Let's take some questions. We still do have 19 minutes. I just wanted to give you a warning on where we are, because when I'm presenting, I can lose track of time. We do have some questions in here. Let's see. A couple of these are Fugue specific, so I'll just take them. One question is from Marisa: are there auto remediation opportunities from Fugue itself? Yes, there are across it's a complex topic to get into, but yes, there are, and we'd be happy to share this with you in a session, in a conversation about Fugue. I'm Josh at fugue.co. Happy to show you those things, but we do different kinds of auto remediation, and yes. And then the other Fugue specific question is, the developer version of Fugue says 5 environments. What qualifies as an environment? And how would multiple AWS accounts work with the developer plan? So an environment, an environment could be an AWS account in all regions. Might be one environment. It might just be in one region. You can scope that. If you're dealing with multiple accounts in the developer plan, you'd be limited to 5. So let me see if there are any. Yeah, Dave, I'm sorry, but the question is literally, are you using a DevOps approach? So no more detail there.
Yeah, and while trying to respect time, I kind of had, I think, a similar question to that DevOps one. Would it be fair, Dave, to say that like your rollback approach would be using kind of the whatever deployment approach that you are using? So let's say if you're using Terraform and a CI/CD, you need to be ready to roll back using that. But if you're primarily maybe using the console, that might be where you're getting into like taking screenshots so you can go in and manually revert back to what you had before.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously the former is better than the latter, right? We don't want to have to manually undo things, right? So totally. Yes.
All right, we're going to do the background, and then we're going to get into the rest of this. We're going to go back to computer history. What is that computer?
I think
it's not next step, although next was one of my very favorite computers ever. It's a little later. This is 90s. No blinking idea. Question. Oh, there we go. Jonathan Trin got it. This is from the brief but gloried days of the workstation before Macs and PCs got fast. It is a Silicon Graphics and SGI Octane. If you enjoyed movies like Jurassic Park, it's probably made on one of these. Man, were they expensive, but very cool. Okay, let's turn it back over to you. And Emmanuel, I see you got a question, but we'll catch it in the last of the Q&As. Okay, Dave, back to you.
All right. So the next phase is proving you're compliant and monitoring. Right. So you've done your remediation. Your environment is clean or near clean. In some cases, some rules you can ask for waivers, but how do you prove and monitor compliance? Well, so if you're going through an auditing environment with an auditor, and I saw Deb in the chat, she actually had a really good point that maybe we'll come back to, is you're going to have to provide artifacts of evidence. And one of the things we have been using is what's called the visualizer, which is a live rendering tool that actually has been working really well to provide to PCI auditors. So we don't have to draw and spend hours drawing different diagrams like we have. So this is one thing you'll have to provide, likely. Another thing that we use is exporting the data for our environments and running reports. And that's what's I just want to show. So we can kick everything out as like an Excel format, PDF, and go line by line, resource by resource, control by control, and provide these to auditors. So this is stuff that you'll have to do to prove your to provide evidence. And the auditor you work with will have specific requests and other things that they'll ask for. But what I want to show is there are, the tools that help you get compliant. They are providing more value into things like diagrams and sketches and reports, so that you're not having to manually provide all of that evidence. Well, now that you've proved compliance, we get into the monitoring piece. And I think to the person who asked about remediation or forced remediation, starting getting to this topic of your system now, let's say, is a gold standard, right? You're happy with it. One of the things that we now implement and can implement is something called drift detection, which is basically any changes from a defined baseline or state are now, we can monitor those changes, right? So I'm just going to alt tab back to this environment, right? So this is, again, the same sandbox environment. We're working in environment, in this case being a Fugue pointing at an AWS account. And these are drift events against a baseline. And a drift, again, is any change, removal, addition, change. And I just want to show what that looks like. So here is the creation of an S3 bucket. Here are the details about it. This, and the way that we work internally in the company I work for, we have these wired up into, we get a Slack notification, and an email is sent to our ticketing system. We use something called Freshdesk. It's kind of a lightweight, it's perfect for the size of us, but any drift that occurs across any of our environments, whether they're ours or customers, a ticket's created, and based upon some keywords in the subject, they're assigned to an engineer to then determine whether that's valid or not, or whether we need to roll back. Now, there is a way to do automated remediation, forced remediation, where we can configure, like in this case, Fugue again, where it'll go back, it'll programmatically undo that change. But for most of our customers and most of our environments, it doesn't necessarily make sense due to the nature of the environments, but that's an option as well. So that's just a quick summary of, once you're compliant, how do you prove it? And then how do you kind of move forward from there? All right, I'm gonna slow down for a second before we get into sort of the last phase of this.
Yeah, we'll do one more background. Let's see, throw it in the chat if you want history of computing, or, well, I've run out of games, so it's gonna be history of computing. All right, here we go. This is going way back in the day. Way back. And Robert got it instantly. This is the ENIAC. This is the first binary digital computer of any electronic computer at any scale. This is pre-transistor, so this is back when with 4K memory. Did it have that much memory? If it had 4K memory, that's a lot of vacuum tubes, because that computer, this is pre-transistor, so it used little things like this, actually slightly bigger ones, vacuum tubes, to hold state in memory. And one of the jobs was running around and replacing tools. And Robert says he did not actually work on that computer. I believe that. All right, we haven't had a lot of questions on this last section. Let me just scroll up to make sure. Oh, we do have one, Dave. Emmanuel asks, can STIGs, and STIGs are like, the rules around configuration of compute instances that a lot of my background is national security, DoD stuff, so STIGs are like how you're configured, what ports are open and so on. Can they be used on public cloud, or are they only applicable on gov cloud? So Dave, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know if you're familiar with STIGs. Is that something you want to take, or do you want me to take it?
I'll answer the best I can, and I'll tell you what I know about STIGs, and then but I ultimately can't answer it, but I'll tell you what I know. So DISA, Defense Information System Agency Authority, which basically runs the IT systems for DoD and other federal agencies. The STIG process, I forgot what it stands for, system testing, something, security testing. STIGs primarily, at least in the past, apply to operating systems. So you would get a STIG for Ubuntu, a STIG for Red Hat, a STIG for Windows. I don't think there's a STIG. I could be wrong, and I'm not going to go Google it right now. But I'm not aware of a STIG for the cloud. But that's what you get with like the NIST spec 853 for the public cloud. You're basically getting, in this case, NIST, or the U.S. government's recommendation on how to harden the cloud. So that's the best way I can answer. And
I think that's a solid answer. And of course, you can apply STIGs to anything running an operating system that has a STIG for it. So it doesn't matter if it's in GovCloud or elsewhere. Security Technology Implementation Guide.
Thank you.
Galed says is what STIG stands for. Thank you, Galed. I have just always known them as STIGs.
So Dave, I'm actually kind of curious, what you've seen, your experiences with regard to both, because before I used to think of kind of compliance as maybe like this annual thing. And once you've passed it, you're good to go for the year. And obviously that's not really the case. And our clouds are kind of changing all the time. When you think about like auditors and what they require, whether it's maybe an industry regulation auditor or maybe one of your customers that's auditing you, what kind of things do they like to see from an ongoing kind of continuous reporting nature? And then the second part of my question is, what have you seen kind of work operationally in managing beyond kind of the tickets, like who's on point to kind of evaluate whether a change, a drift event is a problem or not, and then going about remediating that, assuming you're not doing automated remediation?
Okay, so there's a couple pieces there. The thing that most of these families require is whatever you're doing and you're submitting as part of your audit has to have been in place for X number of months, right? Maybe 3 months, it may be 90 days, or 90 days, 3 months, sorry. It may be longer. So waiting till the month before your auditor shows up, and in fact, most of them don't work like this. They're aware of this. They'll kind of coach you. I think is not sound. Plus, you're removing the potential real value of doing the work, right? In my opinion, just complying with an audit is sort of that's one small part of the real value. The real value is protecting your organization. So to get to the first part of your question is, and this actually goes right into the closing topic that I want to talk about, is instead of a sort of cycle where you gear up for an audit and then you do a bunch of cleanup and then you hope you pass, there are some more modern ways that kind of like shift left is the term, right? Where we can be proactive, preventative, and be doing this remediation work along the way. Actually, we can prevent misconfiguration and out of compliance things from happening. This is all within the context of the cloud. When you get into the broader organizational things like how your HR runs, that's a different story. But what that ultimately does is it reduces, it doesn't just make the work, you're not just waiting until 1 month to scramble. You're actually reducing the overall work you're doing. Your organization has a safer posture throughout the year. And then when you come time to actually, prove evidence and work with your auditor, it's much easier. You have, for example, the graphic we saw, the visualizer, you're not having to take 2 or 3 days and draw diagrams, right? Because anytime you can render a real state of your environment. So that's one part of it. I mean, and I don't know if I can go into this now or want to, there's some other parts to your question that I'd want to kind of tease apart though.
Yeah, we're down to about 5 minutes. If you want to share screen again real quick. And by the way, to attendees, I mean, we can run long, I think all of us on this side, but we also want to respect your time. One of the things I think about when looking at this slide is how fast is this running, right? And in an audit process, that might be quarterly or even annually. We believe at Fugue that this should be happening in minutes, from determined state to identify gaps to remediate to prove and monitor. That flywheel you should be spinning up to go really, really fast. And the only way to do that is through automation. But the important thing is that you start on it. The important thing is that you start addressing it. And even if you're doing it, slowly at first, that's better than not doing it. Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you. We got a few minutes left. Take us home.
I just want to emphasize your last point there, right? So exactly what you said. Rather than waiting to do this once a year, you know, and you scramble for a month, right? This process should be, can be, and that's what we really get passionate about. This can be done every deployment. Every time you check in code, every time you make infrastructure changes, this whole process can be continually running. And that gets into injecting this sort of prevention idea. And the way we do that, one of the ways this is done is through the use of policy as code. And this is its own talk. We've actually done one with Fugue. I think it's gaining traction in the industry. I think it will be the state of the art soon, if it's not already. At a very high level, how this works is that when you commit to infrastructure as code, when you commit to scripting for your infrastructure, right? Whatever your platform is, Terraform or CloudFormation or ARM templates or serverless or Pulumi or whatever it is, you as part of your, you know, maybe it's a push in your repo, maybe it's so whatever the action is, you parse this, you feed this to tools like we love Open Policy Agent. I think Fugue does too. It's great. It's open source. There's some like HashiCorp has Sentinel. There's actually the regular repo, which is a Fugue project. They interpret your scripts against policies. And if they, and when I say a policy, I mean like, is your S3 bucket encrypted? Are you requiring HTTPS? Are you EBS disk? All the stuff that we've talked about fixing, right? Everything we've talked about fixing, you can now preventatively and proactively search against your infrastructure as code. And if it's out of compliance, you fail this process. And you instruct the developer or deployment engineer, say, hey, you failed on this rule. Please go fix it. And of course, once it passes, your deployment occurs to the cloud. And this is a pipeline, right? This is all automated. There's no humans doing this. You build these pipelines. You teach your developers and engineers to use this, and then you unburden them from having to know all the security policy, but you empower them to test their own work. And you federate that responsibility, so it's not through one pinch point like one or two engineers. And you're really getting into test-focused, test-driven development for infrastructure, because infrastructure now is software. For the sake of time, I'm not going to dig deeper in these. This is an example of what's called Rego rule set. That's actually in one of these repos down here, but this is how you do it. This is an example. You can go right now. You can spin up this thing called Regula. We have a flavor of Open Policy Agent, but you can start doing this right now and integrate this into your pipeline. That's my slides.
Dave, thank you so much. We're gonna put up links to things like Regula, which is an open source project of CIS benchmarks that you can use using Open Policy Agent. We're right at the top of the hour. We still have a number of folks here. Thanks for hanging with us, and I hope this was a really useful session to you. I found it pretty extremely interesting. Since we got a bunch, I'll do one more background. You got one more chance to win something?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'll stop sharing.
Do that. All right, a bit of a tangent, but any thoughts on Open Security Controls Assessment Language, OSCAL? So I do have some thoughts on it. It's not Altered Beast, but Carrie Cunningham got it, the background. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, maybe the greatest video game ever made. So Carrie won that one. As far as OSCAL goes, OSCAL can help you define the description of issues, but it doesn't have a consistent runtime, and it's fairly unwieldy in my opinion. But I don't like personally like having to write XML or YAML or JSON or things like that. The really cool thing about Open Policy Agent is it's based on it's a real programming language, and it's based on data log. So it's a declarative query language, and we'll post links to this, but there is a REPL, we have a tool called Frego, which is the Fugue Rego toolkit, which is for OPA. that lets you do things like set breakpoints and really program. So OSCAL is more of a data standard. All right. You're getting a lot of thanks here, Dave. And
yeah, I wanted to throw something out to, I guess, both of you. I'll start with Dave. We did a survey a while back, and what I found was kind of interesting is the primary driver behind shift left, whether we're talking about application security, cloud security, or both. One is driven by the engineers and the developers, not necessarily the security teams and the compliance teams. But the motivation for doing it isn't necessarily to be more secure or more compliant. It's to just move faster and make things easier on them and avoid things like, developing a bunch of stuff and then getting to the finish line and then having the auditors come in and to try to get the approval, and then they send you back to the drawing board and you have to rewrite a bunch of stuff. And just wanted to kind of talk to you about maybe the motivations or value of just moving fast and eliminating headaches in all of this.
Can I answer that or take a run at it?
Yeah.
I think one of the things I find myself thinking about a lot and working with people on is people love the public cloud relative to like the data center or their on-prem stuff or co-located environments, because it's so fast, right? I mean, especially if you came from that generation. I mean, I started racking servers and then the VMware explosion, and 10 years ago got into the public cloud. It's so fast. It's what makes it great. Well, we have to protect that while preserving the value, that speed. And I've been part of projects and environments where they have a very sort of draconian, old school way of doing security that squeezes all the value out of why people love and have gone to the public cloud. It's all gone. So they're just as slow as they were when they had to rack servers. They're just as slow as before. At that point, it's like, why did you go here? So I don't know if this is just kind of where my mind goes, is we want to preserve why people love it and why it's changed the industry while still being secure. And the only way to do that, in my opinion, is to automate security.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've all seen organizations go to the public cloud and then kind of bring all of their process and organizational cruft with them to the cloud, and they're just moving just as slow as they were in the data center. So it kind of like eliminated a lot of the value that you can get from just moving fast.
On that note too, one of the things that we try and do is we use, when a customer moves to the cloud for the first time, we use that as a step change to also try and improve their actual process, to say, okay, let's remove this very slow, burdensome process. Let's update what your process and policies are so we can take advantage of it. But that often happens hand in glove. It's not just the technology, but also the policies and process.
Yeah, I mean, security serves the business function, right? Security is about making a system safe for performing the business function. And to echo what Dave was saying, if you take away the benefits of the cloud to slow things down to increase security, your competitor isn't doing that, and their business function will evolve more quickly and they will outcompete you. So those of us who are doing security in cloud, we have to operate at the speed of cloud. That's not negotiable. And if your strategy is to try to slow things down, eventually you will lose that political fight in your organization for that reason. Okay, I think we're a little over. Drew, why don't I hand it back over to you as MC. Dave, thank you so much for teaching us all on this topic, and I found it really interesting, and I love particularly your breakdown into those kind of phases and operations, because it lets you wrap your head around it. Maybe somebody in the audience would take a very different approach to one of those things with different tooling. That's fine, as long as you're performing those functions and you're thinking through that whole process. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun developing this with you, Dave, and thanks for taking the, all the hits over the years to put this together and hopefully help other people avoid some of those hits. So, I'm sure we'll be doing some more stuff in the future. Thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today.